It's really good to see you all. My job is just to introduce the moderator who is going to look after everything that needs to be looked after in this session. So Erbin Crowell, please introduce yourself and the session. And thank you very much. I'll stop sharing the screen so that our presenters can do that.
Thanks so much, Sonia. Yeah, my name is Erbin Crowell, and I'll be moderating our next session. My day job is Executive Director for the neighboring Food Co-op Association, which is a secondary cooperative in the Northeast US. I also serve on the board of directors of the National Cooperative Business Association here. And I should mention that I'm honored to serve on the board of the Cooperative Management Education Co-op, which works to oversee, support, and promote the great work of our staff in putting on events like this, as well as providing management education for our co-ops. And so just from that perspective for a second, I want to thank you all and thank all of our contributors, and look forward to future opportunities for this kind of collaboration as we continue to strengthen cooperative education. I'm particularly excited for this presentation, both in terms of the potential of multi-stakeholder models, in terms of engaging broader groups of stakeholders directly in cooperatives, as well as mobilizing collaboration across sectors for economic development. In our own association, we've had the opportunity to incorporate a few grocery co-ops on multi-stakeholder models, and you know, it's sort of an emerging field in terms of best practices for governance and management. So I'm looking forward to this presentation. First, we'll hear from Oier Imaz, Fred Freundlich, and Aritz Kanpandegi, sorry if I messed that last name up, on governance and multi-stakeholder cooperatives in Mondragon. And I'll mention, I first came from the worker co-op background and was very intrigued in the reading I did on Mondragon on the number of multi-stakeholder co-ops mentioned, but how little analysis there was about that model. So I'm really looking forward to this presentation. Then we'll hear from Júlia Martins Rodrigues and Nathan Schneider on a multi-stakeholder network example in Colorado. So as a quick reminder to our presenters, each have about 15 minutes to present, so we can wrap up around 2 and have about 10 minutes for feedback and questions. And with that, I'll invite Oier and Fred to get us started. Thanks.
Ready?
Yeah,
Thanks,
ready.
Erbin. Thanks, Erbin, for the introduction. Thank everyone at St. Mary's and around the world who participated in organizing this event, always a difficult task. I'm Fred Freundlich. I'm an American transplant here in the Basque country since 1995. I'll do the first part of the presentation, and then an authentic Basque, Oier Imaz, will take over. And our colleague Aritz Kanpandegi is nervous about his English, so he will be in the wings. Our topic, as Erbin mentioned, is governance and multi-stakeholder co-ops in Mondragon. Next slide. Our table of contents, we got our introductions. We're going to talk a little bit about the theory, what our contribution might be, and then Oier will take over to talk about our results so far and offer some final thoughts. Next. What does the theory say? We've now heard it several times, so I'll go over this quickly. The cooperative difference in governance is found in co-ops' special approach to ownership control. I mean, the very notion of membership in a business enterprise. You recall Sonia's talk from yesterday and others as well in this conference and in the past. Most of the science on governance is based on the now famous agency theory, which talks about the principal agent dilemma, right? Controlled by investors, owners of managers and workers who have different interests than they do in conventional companies. Humanistic governance theory, though, by contrast, suggests, based on the pro-social nature of co-ops, that alignment among stakeholders can be significantly greater. And co-ops and humanistic theorists reject the standard investor logic and the purely instrumental and individualistic assumptions of agency theory. But we all know too well that this alignment is not guaranteed. Depends on things like behavioral issues, cognitive and social influences that can limit or distort decision-making in co-ops, environmental issues, that is the legal, institutional, and economic context, also influences governance structures and practices, as many of you know and feel in your bones. Next slide. All this suggests, in theory, in any case, interest in networked governance. See Pearson and Turnbull and others, that multiple boards can help with these behavioral issues. It can diminish individual and group biases, keep information overload more at bay. But theory and practice demand that we never ignore the now famous complex responsive processes of relating in effective governance functioning. That is ordinary day-to-day human interaction in regular English. This will affect governance as well. All the processes and organizations around day-to-day interaction and operations and their relationship with governments. They can't really be separated at the end of the day. So humanistic theory suggests that we look into what might be called regenerative cycles of collaborative control. They help organizations self-correct, stay on track. This kind of control, networked, multi-centric, provides for a separation of powers and checks and balances, can lead to a broader sharing of control over decisions and resources among internal, but also potentially in among external stakeholders, which are particularly relevant, obviously, in multi-stakeholder co-ops. And all this allows for more dynamism and flexibility in governance structures and processes, help co-ops respond to different and changing regulatory and legal contexts and business and market circumstances. Thus our interest in multi-stakeholder co-op governance. Next slide. Our contribution is to examine multi-stakeholder governance in multi-stakeholder co-op governance in a large cooperative group called Mondragon, in a joint research project with the International Center for Cooperative Management, whose participants, the organizers of this conference, the conference shall remain unnamed to protect their reputations. Just kidding. Grateful to them and to the broader project with Belgium to be able to participate and learn a great deal about Mondragon and other kinds of co-ops that have multi-stakeholder arrangements. Next slide. So for the uninitiated, a thumbnail sketch of Mondragon, which we call here MCE, the Mondragon Cooperative Experience. Its first co-op was created in 1956. There are now 96 co-ops and over 140 affiliates and subsidiaries, workforce of over 80,000, more than 12 billion euros in sales in 2019. It's known as an integrated network of co-ops, and the co-ops are in 4 different areas: industry, retail, finance, and knowledge. But it's known as a network of worker co-ops, setting aside issues of non-member workers and subsidiaries and other kinds of controversies, which are not our subject today, but are certainly worth investigating. Our interest was sparked initially by exactly what Erbin said earlier, this contrast between that is multi-stakeholder co-ops in a complex of co-ops known for worker co-ops. We knew there were important multi-stakeholder co-ops in the group, but their governance hasn't really been studied as such. We're also sparked, though, by the precedent of the Mondragon cooperative experience as a multi-stakeholder cooperative organization. I mean, the network is effectively a multi-stakeholder co-op. But our focus now is on individual multi-stakeholder co-ops in the Mondragon cooperative experience and their governance in terms of purpose, structure, process, and dynamics, following from Sonia and Karen's and others, and Kian's and others' framework. The methods we've used thus far: first, lots of desktop research, detailed study of bylaws and other fascinating documents in more detail than I had ever done before. And then field work is started with multi-stakeholder co-ops in the MCE. A detailed questionnaire to over 20 co-ops. We got 20 of them back. In-depth interviews so far with mainly high-profile executives, other managers, and board members. Our goal up to now is to understand the official view in Mondragon of multi-stakeholder co-op governance and not to problematize it, at least not yet. Please keep in mind that this is a work in progress, and next time you hear from us, it's likely to be different. Thanks very much. Over to Oier.
So, thank you, Fred. And in terms of findings of a work in progress, meaning not aspirations are still not high, the first one would be that the fact that, contrary to popular notions of Mondragon as a network based in a classic industrial worker cooperative model, we have identified 24 cooperatives, which out of 96, which actually are multi-stakeholder, 2 of the biggest 3, most among the non-industrial cooperatives within the group, and between these 24, 5 are industrial cooperatives. Therefore, we can say that multi-stakeholder cooperatives, even though they are not representative of the group, are a significant part of it. In terms of purpose, we have seen that there is a common baseline to all of them, which is basically to serve other cooperatives in the community or the wider society. However, this common baseline diverges depending on how each of these cooperatives interpret the relationship between the cooperative, the community, and the wider society. Indeed, we have been able to differentiate 3 main categories, which are somehow overlapping. I mean, they are not strict, depending on whether a cooperative aims at servicing other cooperatives, provides services to the community, or provide services to other cooperatives or the community through pursuing business or protecting or creating employment. So we can think that more or less these 3 groups respond to the evolution within each of these cooperatives of this primary aim or common baseline. Structurally, all these cooperatives are somehow worker cooperative oriented, meaning membership is centered around the figure of the worker member, because it has a significant control in terms of decision making, and also it is the main actor, for example, in the distribution of economic surplus. However, there are differences with other worker member cooperatives in the group. A relevant one will be that the principle of one member, one vote is not practiced as such. And this is because there are different types of memberships. In all of them, there are worker members. It's a figure that is common to all these cooperatives. In some of them, in most of them, there are collaborative members, which are either other cooperatives or institutional entities. In some of them, there are users, almost a half, and in some of them, a bit less, investors. But just to clarify that investors in our case refers to other cooperatives or structures within the network itself. And then there are some special cases. Another interesting characteristic we have found is that the composition in the governing council and the assembly is not the same for almost a half of these cooperatives. And we still don't know exactly, meaning balance between worker members and other members is different in the same cooperative if we compare the General Assembly and the Governing Council. However, one of the main most striking features is that any one of these cooperatives has, in any one of these cooperatives, the worker members have a majority neither in the Governing Council nor in the Assembly, except for some exceptions. And this brings about the process dimension of the governance of this kind of cooperatives, because in some of them, it has been clearly stated that tensions arise because of this apparent mismatch between the centrality of the worker member, the figure of the worker member, and its relatively weak position in terms of decision making. However, in most of them, at least in the interviews we have made until now, it is reported that this mismatch doesn't create much of conflictivity in boards. Asked why, they used to refer to complementary bodies, meaning bodies that either because they are ad hoc created with this sense, or the roles are reinforced, help worker members to advance their own agenda. They also refer to cultural elements as trust and division of labor depending on the kind of decision, unwritten rules, or simply that tensions arise in other places or involving other actors. In terms of process, we have not found any other common trend, for example, in terms of election mechanisms, which some are elaborate, other not, and other policies regarding, for example, remuneration, eligibility, and so on. However, it is interesting to underline, because it is related also to our discussion today in this symposium, that a common trend to all of them has been how they understand the profile of the governing councils, of the persons that are part of the governing council. In all of these cooperatives, there is a huge diversity of figures, meaning they are users, investors, legal and physical persons, and so on. However, in most of them, we have seen that the management-oriented viewpoint is valued, meaning that it's somehow oriented, no matter which specific figure they represent. Diversity is valued in terms of its capacity to bring, for example, expert and more independent knowledge into the governing councils. However, with one particular note or footnote, that in all of them, the cooperativist dimension is taken into consideration. I will explain it a bit later, a bit more, but I will step to the next one, because this the dynamic within the profiles of the governing councils of these cooperatives lets me explain quite easily what happens about the dynamics and how they influence the governance. Because it is true that growing complexity, competitiveness, size, all those elements directly influence in all those cooperative internal structures and processes. I mean, business dynamics influence the purpose of these cooperatives. Regulations affect their structure. It happens also the other way around. We have identified some cases in which these cooperatives have been the reason to change legislation. However, if we put the focus in which levers are moving these cooperatives in the direction we have identified as a multi-stakeholder cooperative governance model, we have to say that, on the one hand, the structure of these cooperatives does not respond to this debate. So for us, it's an inheritance of the origins of these cooperatives. Most of them were created by other cooperatives to serve their needs, so these cooperatives have present still in their boards. However, there is a reinterpretation of these structures in order to face precisely what comes from outside. All this pressure to conform to conventional patterns via regulation and business orientation, meaning, finally, there is a discussion in which these structures are being reinterpreted in order to respond to isomorphic dynamics. However, is this where the tension becomes interesting? Because we are seeing too some new discourses emerging, meaning this pressure to isomorphic dynamics meets also the meaning history of all these cooperatives within the experience itself. So they provoke an attempt to reinterpret what democracy means in cooperatives and keep this discussion ongoing in lines we think are more close to the networked governance model, for example, taking some distance from the representative understanding of democracy, but moving forward towards more deliberative understandings of what democracy means. Similarly, it is provoking a discussion on the original meaning of the cooperative, within the experience of the model of cooperative experience. And it is provoking responses that might not respond ideally to what we think an classical industrial worker cooperative should be, but can provide interesting alternatives to discussions that we have been having these days. For example, in terms of including external independent views within the board in the cooperative bank, there is regulation which forces them to include independent profiles, but in Laboral Kucha they have found a quite imaginative solution. So far as they have to have independent members, they appreciate the expertise these experts bring into the board, but at the same time they understand that they have to understand in the context in which they are using this expertise. So the independent experts that are participating actually in the board of Laboral Kucha are board members of other cooperatives within the group, so that they ensure somehow that they have the necessary skills to comply with the regulation, while at the same time they permit them to continue, keep and advance and reinvent the cooperative dimension of the bank, of the Laboral Kucha. So this is more or less what I have. I'm in time, so let final thoughts to our discussion.
Thank you so much, Oier. I feel like I rushed you somehow without even saying anything. I'm sorry you had to talk so fast there. But I appreciate
Well,
you taking the time, and I hope we'll have some good conversation at the conclusion of this. So thank you both so much. And now let's see, we want to get Júlia and Nathan's presentation up.
Hey, hello.
Okay, thank you.
Let me share it, my screen. Can you see it?
Yep.
Oh, great. Hi, it's my pleasure to be here today with all of you during this International Cooperative Governance Symposium. And I'd like to start by thanking Sobey School of Business, St. Mary's University for this beautiful opportunity. My name is Júlia Martins, and I'm in the final stage of my doctorate at the Università degli Studi di Camerino in Italy, under the supervision of Professor Francesco Casali. And I'm thrilled to be sharing the research I've developed with Nathan Schneider through an amazing collaboration during my time at the University of Colorado Boulder as a visiting scholar. Professor Schneider is an outstanding researcher and a passionate cooperative advocate who taught me a lot during the development of this case. And we conducted multiple interviews with a group of local entrepreneurs and cooperative members who created an opportunistic multi-stakeholder network to manage operations in the solar industry and accelerate the renewable energy transition in the state of Colorado. Colorado has a vibrant entrepreneurial community with numerous environmental organizations, green energy firms, and the political environment supportive of renewable energy. And there is also a growing state support for employee ownership and a positive regulatory climate enabling successful cooperatives. In fact, both of us, Professor Schneider and I, have collaborated with the Colorado Employee Ownership Office within the Colorado Economic Office and International Trade within the Education Subcommittee. And we noticed a very unique cooperative network in the region that had not been explored and decided to dive into this case. So this work was developed during 2020 and 2021 in contact with a cooperative network within the clean energy sector of Colorado. The network includes one of the largest worker co-ops in the United States, a purchasing power that reaches across North America, and a financial network for both solar consumers and aligned businesses. And it always started with Namaste Solar. Namaste Solar is a Boulder-based worker cooperative that designs and installs solar electric systems. Namaste Solar became a poster child at the American Recovery Plan out of the Great Recession. In 2009, President Obama and Joe Biden spotlighted a solar installation by Namaste Solar at the Denver Museum of Nature and Science. Well, Namaste Solar was founded as a conventional C Corp, but has always been very unorthodox firm, embracing employee ownership even before its cooperative conversion in 2011. The co-founders built a custom stock ownership structure that could include future employees as owners. The business has always maintained a highly transparent culture of open book management and practiced democratic control in operational decisions based on one person, one vote voting mechanism. And in the beginning, everyone was involved in many, many decisions. But as it grows, expanding the membership base, the one member, one vote cooperative aspect got more challenging. So over time, the voting dynamic changed. In comparison to the early practice, Namaste has developed a more sophisticated governance, adjusting its operations. Namaste Solar's governance model has evolved into a more dynamic system that specifies different spheres of authority with different kinds of decisions, and co-owners join quarterly meetings to discuss and vote major business decisions, while everyday operations are handled by a clear management structure and distinct business departments. But anyway, well, the company worker ownership structure is the subject of a case taught in business schools. Namaste has been awarded many times for its workplace and numerous projects. However, this recognition has focused on Namaste as a single company rather than the seed for a network that has reached far beyond Colorado. Throughout the years, Namaste Solar faced daunting challenges, including the harsh competition from a large national competitor, a sudden interruption on a solar rewards program in Colorado, cutting some tax incentives. And the company even thought about couple acquisition offers in the past. And at some point, Namaste Solar explored the idea of expanding its operations nationally and even opened offices outside Colorado, which resulted in overextension and a poor financial performance. So as challenges and opportunities arose, Namaste Solar gradually realized it could support its own growth by offering its founding DNA to other cooperatives, cooperative structures without overextending its own operations and compromising its democratic nature. So in 2011, the same year Namaste became a cooperative, Amicus Solar was founded by Namaste Solar and other solar companies in a collaborative process led by former Namaste co-owners. Amicus Solar is another cooperative with a completely different stakeholder structure. It is a purchasing cooperative owned not by the employees, but by the companies that buy solar equipment together. So Amicus Solar allows member companies, including Namaste Solar, to remain independently owned and locally operated while uniting their market power. So as in 2021, Amicus has attracted businesses, companies all over the US, and have even extended operations internationally to Canada and Mexico, and as well achieve impact at a national scale and beyond. And through this process, Amicus Solar member companies realized they had a common challenge selling operations and maintenance contracts, because in this industry, in the solar industry, follow-on services in distributed portfolios all over the region can be very, very costly for a local company. Therefore, Amicus O&M, the second there, were created in 2016, applying the cooperative model to manage operations and maintenance contracts, enabling members to contract with each other easily. But notice that Amicus Solar and Amicus O&M are sister companies with complementary branding, but they are independent businesses, each with their own cooperative model, their own business model. Well, the Coloradan companies involved in the solar industry identified that financing and the high upfront costs of solar projects as an obstacle for attracting new customers. And to solve this mutual problem, they decided to create a new financial institution, again, deploying the cooperative format with a distinct stakeholder base. And they created the Clean Energy Credit Union that became the first credit union specifically focused on mitigating climate change in 2017. By April this year, it exceeded $60 million in lending. Finally, also in response to the difficulty in accessing investment capital for employee-owned businesses and other mission-centric ventures, Cashua Impact Fund was founded back in 2005 by one of Namaste Solar co-founder as an investment cooperative democratically owned, and controlled by the investor members, providing mission-aligned, long-term, and non-controlling capital to privately held businesses. Namaste Solar, Amicus Solar, Amicus O&M, the Clean Energy Credit Union, Cashua Impact Fund, they're all separate businesses. Each is structured with a different stakeholder model. The businesses are distinct, but maintain ties with each other for cooperative membership, relationship among their leaders, and the shared culture. Here in this network map, I illustrate the bonds among the business leaders. And it's clear how Namaste early employees became key actors in consolidating the network connections, mainly Blake Jones, Amanda Bybee, and Stephen Arvin. Several of the businesses have membership or contractual relationship with each other. Notice, however, that Namaste is not an umbrella for other cooperatives like the Mondragon Corporation, and these businesses are not a corporate conglomerate. Each of them is completely independent with a different stakeholder base. These cooperatives have overlapping interests and overlapping ways to work together in the same ecosystem. At the same time, they're not entirely dependent on each other. So here we have a single group of entrepreneurs aware of the social and market needs that tailor-made a series of cooperatives for a specific purpose, combining scale-friendly structures like Amicus Solar and the Clean Energy Credit Union to local scale democracy-friendly structures to boost the energy transition and strengthen the business operations. And the Namaste network shows it is possible to create a contractual framework based on cooperation among cooperatives to achieve social and environmental benefits and democratic accountability at scale. Through an opportunistic and iterative process, the entrepreneurs in this network adapted diverse cooperative stakeholder models to address emerging challenges. And despite the opportunistic nature, basic patterns from this case do seem portable for other sectors. Here we have listed these basic patterns. You can combine heavy local entities with larger numbers of employees and non-liquid capital with light, leaner entities to facilitate economies of scale. The multi-stakeholder network model of single stakeholder cooperatives, it is not a formula. It requires creativity. It requires a deep understanding of the market conditions. You can form separate business for respective challenge rather than aggregating solutions in a single business and link the businesses together for membership and other relationships. Replicating this approach means encouraging the dynamism of continually generating new businesses alongside the conservatism that tends to set in as cooperatives mature, and also prioritize building a strong shared culture among participants to compensate for the relatively weak structural ties that connect the business in this network. Of course, we do have some shortcomings. Will its connections persist in a generation or more? Dimensions of privilege and entrepreneurs' pre-existing wealth, culture and racial diversity among business owners and users. Still, the Namaste network inspires creativity, and shows we can honor the Principle 6 of the International Cooperative Alliance to identify pathways to transformative scale in multiple industries. Moreover, it reveals how the network can serve a diverse set of stakeholders while retaining focus at each business level, avoiding overextension, and protecting the democratic core. I believe I'm short on time, so I would just thank you for the opportunity to share this today. Thank you. I can't wait for your insights on this research. Thank you, Professor Schneider. That's it.
Thank you so much to all of our presenters for staying on time. I hope you didn't have to cut anything short. And we do have, am I correct, Aaron, about 10 minutes for any questions or feedback? Is that right?
You do have until 15 after the hour.
Okay, 15. So I saw a couple questions in here. First from Suzette, a question about the Mondragon network and whether do the cooperatives themselves see themselves as predominantly worker co-ops, or do they self-identify in this multi-stakeholder form, particularly as you noted with how many multi-stakeholder co-ops there really are in the system? What are your thoughts on that question?
Okay, I go or you go?
Go.
Okay, I mean, it's an impression, but I would say that people see these cooperatives as weird worker cooperatives, that it is not a category as such, but the deviation of the norm. However, in our interviews, it has been interesting that we have identified that they are identifying themselves in this framework, meaning the executives we have been able to interview did take for them some of the aspects we underline about this model, to characterize this model as the framework through which they were explaining how they were handling this structure of the governing bodies, the different processes to balance it, and so on.
It really remains to be seen, I think, Suzanne. I mean, same as Oier, I would say we have impressions, mixed impressions from a healthy handful of different sources and over the years, but we really don't know. But that sounds, I mean, the characterization that Oier made of a weird worker, I mean, people in Mondragon, around Mondragon, in the co-ops, they think we're worker co-ops, but that, you know, who knows? Maybe we'll know better in 6 months.
It seems, it does seem to me like a deeper, almost cultural analysis could be useful there. You know, when you think about sort of the origins of the consumer co-ops in England, right? Even though they were largely organized around the consumer interest, they were very much identified as, you know, co-ops of working people, as working class, as rooted in that sort of culture, even though the economic relationship was one of the consumer. And I wonder if there's some overlap there in terms of how people identify. We also have a question from Mark Andre. It strikes me that the favorable policy environment, this is regarding Colorado, I believe, is the key factor. How did that favorable policy environment come to be, and what exactly makes it easier for the network model you described to prosper? If that's on that, Júlia, or
yes. So I will answer for the Colorado. There is also a question about the conversion of Namaste. So before addressing the policy, if you don't mind, just to clarify, Namaste Solar started as a traditional C corporation. It was not a cooperative initially. It was founded in 2005, and then it fully converted to a cooperative in 2011. But from the beginning, it has a custom ownership and governance structure, very rooted in employee ownership. So from the beginning, it has been practicing one member, one vote mechanism and all the cooperative framework, but they officially became a cooperative in 2011. And regarding the question about the policy, the public policies in Colorado, I believe there is an impact. There is an interesting article written by Jason Weiner and Linda Phillips it's saying that Colorado aims to become the Delaware of cooperatives in the US, as attracting cooperatives to be built in Colorado and convert in Colorado, simplifying the process of creating and converting cooperatives there. They made a survey in the state, and they are very aware of the silver tsunami and the massive retirement in the coming years. And not every business has a succession plan. So especially in the countryside, they are concerned about what's going to happen to these businesses once the owners retire. So the government has found in employee ownership an exit to sell and convert these companies into employee-owned companies and save all those job positions in the state. So Colorado has created first in 2019, created a state commission. It's called the Employee Ownership Commission. Within the Colorado Office of Economic Development and International Trade. And later this commission became an office in itself. So Colorado has an employee ownership office within the government, creating policies, loans to help businesses to convert. So all of the, there's a lot of strategies, and they promote roundtable with local lawyers and local banking services to understand better the cooperative and other employee-owned models, so they can assist these businesses to convert and help to address certain issues. And for example, Professor Schneider and I collaborate with the education subcommittee, help to think how we can educate these communities and what marketing strategies we can have to help people understand better the benefits of employee ownership. So I do think that the policy and have an environment that's very cooperative friendly helps building this type of network in a health ecosystem with a lot of positive externalities. I hope I have answered the question.
One thing I might add there is, one of the things that the Colorado statutes are really great for is building complex multi-stakeholder structures. And that's why a lot of, like, for instance, platform co-ops are incorporating in Colorado. But what's interesting about this example is that's actually not what they're doing. They're not building the multi-stakeholder structure into the business. They're building the multi-stakeholder structure at the level of the network. And enabling each business to be razor focused on its particular role. And so actually, in a lot of ways, the things that the Colorado statutes are most widely used for are not being used in this case. And those worker ownership benefits that are starting to come online here in Colorado were not available at the time that this network got started. So in a lot of respects, the policy environment, other than the solar incentives, was not a major conditioning factor, I think. An important component that did enable this to get going is that among the founders, there was some wealth available to help get these businesses going. And that's really an important thing here, that they were able to some degree, overcome the common, capital access problems with existing resources.
Right, thank you. And I saw a comment in here too about whether, rural electrics played any role in support or funding. And I believe the answer there is no, although I've heard of a lot of discussion around that. It does, a lot of the comments I'm seeing are pointing to sort of the differences, both, my sense of the strength of the Mondragon system has been its sort of formalized support system, multi-stakeholder model that could both, instigate cooperative development, support cooperatives when they're facing problems, be co-operatorial in terms of seeking out opportunities. Here's a model that's much more decentralized, and I saw you point to this in your slide. Sort of, what does that look like over time? Is it resilient, or is it temporarily opportunistic, or opportunistic over time? And then I think a couple comments pointed to the sort of way some of the co-ops we've been talking about this week, such as Arctic cooperatives, in contrast to being sort of laser focused on one product or service, are actually very broad in the products and services they're providing to their communities. So all those seem like very different approaches to similar challenges and opportunities, and could be really interesting to evaluate over time.